Hello, my name is Suzanne McConnell. I'm fiction editor of the Bellevue Literary Review, and I'm here to introduce you to Venita Blackburn, who I'll be interviewing. She published a story with us in 2011, and since that time, she's published 3 books. She has been reviewed in the New York Times. 2 of those books have been reviewed in the New York Times. She's also got a full-time job teaching at Fresno State University in California, and she started a free writing program, Live Write, outside of the university to encourage writers from communities of color. So we have a lot to talk about, and I want to introduce Venita Blackburn.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're so welcome, Venita. I'm happy to be talking to you. So when I encountered your story submission in 2011, and then we accepted it, and then I edited, I was struck by the authority, energy, humor, and freshness of your prose. And I never forgot your name, even after editing and reading tons of stories past yours. And I was not surprised when I saw, the first time I saw a book reviewed in the New York Times, I think it was How to Wrestle a Girl.
That's it.
Short story collection. And then last fall, I believe, no, when was it? The other review of your novel was in the New York Times.
It's this winter, I think.
Yeah, it was shorter than that. And I was drawn to it because, well, I was drawn to it, but also because of the topic, which we can talk about a little later. So we're going to start with you reading a bit from that first story.
All right. Okay, string theory. I did not speak until I was 6 years old. My laugh was pretty as new chalk, I've been told, and I attempted time travel at age 20. No one ever told me, "You're not like most girls." Some things I learned as I went along. It was the first week of fall classes my sophomore year when I met Mariko and her boyfriend, Alki. I sat as usual between 2 empty chairs in the front row of the room. "Welcome again to quantum physics," said the professor, a mid-20s tenure-track phenom not yet jaded by the academic institution frequently referred to as the tar pit. His slack-jawed yet earnest response to every less than intelligent question endeared him to his students. I loved math, but I like to ask too many questions. Math requires acceptance, and I was too often compelled to ask why and how. I think I'm a philosopher and a mathematician. Only the theorists allow for both. Though I'm told it would have been difficult to say from my facial expressions at the time, this was my favorite class. On the first day, the professor presented a 3D slideshow on the theory of black holes, after which a young man inquired about the location of the nearest Applebee's. The remaining 7 minutes of class involved determining the fastest route to that particular restaurant. On the second day, however, the class paid more attention. My mind wandered, as I'd been told it should never be allowed to do. This happened once before, when I was a junior in high school, and what followed was about to happen again. My earth science class had spent a month discussing nothing but climate change. In my memory now, the instructor is only a viscous blob of purple jelly with a voice like a public service announcement. "You all might find this hard to believe," the blot said, "but the moon, as we learned, is a vital part of the Earth's development. Believe it or not, the moon is gradually moving away from us." I stayed alert during these classes and wrote notes quickly, almost verbatim, but this announcement made me stop. That's right. During early Earth, the moon was much closer and the days much shorter and hotter, but fortunately for us, the moon kept spinning, much like a pendulum in reverse. Instead of the rotations becoming shorter and shorter, they grew wider and wider. The days became longer, giving the seasons time to develop and life as we know it the chance to prosper. This idea had a profound effect on me. I cried. As if in response, the block continued on like some sadistic emotional parasite, siphoning the fragile contentment from my body. The fixed and true universe I knew suddenly felt fraught with a violent uncertainty that I could not control and didn't want to consider. To calm down, I wrote down the number 1, followed by a 0, then another, and another without stopping. "Can any of you guess the repercussions of such an event on the Earth?" the blot asked. Longer days, yes, but without seasons, without tides, the Earth will slow down. And if the Earth slows down, the planet will get superheated in some areas and frozen in others. Shoulder heaving sobs escaped me, and a few of my classmates noticed, concerned but too curious to act. There is a good side, though, the blot said. This will take billions of years to happen. By then, the sun will have already eaten the Earth in its fiery last stages of expansion before death. The bell rang to signal the end of class, and I passed out. The students who had noticed my sobs dragged me by the elbows down the crowded hall while the block occasionally shouted, "Get the fuck out of the way," or "God damn it, move." On the way, I regained consciousness. Now I was holding a paper cup of water in my left hand and sitting up in a chair in my quantum physics class. The professor and Mariko Lee crouched in front of me. They told me I fainted. Mariko's face had the shape and depth of a leaf. Her presence was that of a very large man, even though she was only big enough to not be a dwarf. Her wrists were a mystery. Something happens to people that rescue other people, a covenant of sorts. The danger can be big or small, dragging a man from a burning car, plucking a fish bone from a toddler's throat, or giving water to one who faints and is thirsty. The promise is the same. When I see you, I will keep you safe. I looked at Mariko, the quasar freckles between her eyes, and that promise was made.
I was struck after reading your novel of some similarities. Like one of the things is one of the things I like in your work is going from a specific situation, but a huge wide world behind it. And in string theory, you've got the moon, you've got quantum. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. Also, I just noticed something interesting that I enjoyed in your novel, which was pronouncements, wise pronouncements.
You mean sort of judgments about the world?
Well, no, like the fact that if there's a covenant between people who, I mean, I think that's true. I suddenly thought of a time I almost drowned. Yeah. So, anyway,
I agree. I mean, I do like to think about the meaning behind small gestures and sort of see if there's language left for us to to apply to that. So
yeah. I think in New York, since we're on the street all the time, there's so many small gestures, small things that are said, and they're behind a backdrop of a large city. So I love that. It's really wonderful. So I'm just going to stick to BLR for 1 minute. When BLR first came out, it was, I don't know, I can't remember the year, 2002, I believe, but I published my first story. I published with them is how I found out about BLR. And I was thrilled to find out that there was a journal that was aimed at work that was humanitarian, healing, health, all those issues. Now there's some more, but it was still a fairly new journal when you published. How did you hear about BLR?
I did hear about it through a mutual writer friend at the time, and I think I was in a sort of a hyper publishing state during that moment, sort of brand new writer, not a lot of credits on the CV, and then sort of hunting for places that are looking for new work and looking for something a little odd. And BLR came on the roster of submission things that I would start to submit to. And I was really lucky. So you were one of my first publications, I think, ever. And it definitely was one that went into the contribution of my first collection, Black Jesus and Other Superheroes. So I am very, grateful for that acknowledgement and assistance.
Is it in that collection? Because that's the only one I didn't read.
It is. It is in the first one.
Good. Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to ask these usual questions that people always ask writers, but everybody wants to know. When did you start writing?
Okay, well, professionally later, but I was always, into language and into sort of, investing in this in this kind of, art before I even called it an art, before I knew it was possible to make a living out of it and anything like that. So I was reading really early, so sort of maybe 2 or 3, fairly soon, because my mother would read to me, and then until I could sort of read back to her and kind of recognize words and all that kind of stuff. And so I was always invested in language. But I remember sort of maybe early middle school, I wrote a kind of a weird poem thing and, submitted it. And a lot of the teachers liked it. My mom was really proud. She showed it to some of her work people, her work colleagues and things. And that was kind of a new turning point for me, where I recognized that adults will pay attention to me if I do this. So this is a thing that has some value to people who get to determine what is valuable. So I kind of held on to that. It didn't last forever. Eventually, I realized, no, artists are poor and they struggle. And no, thank you. I want to do almost. I picked almost everything. I went through a long list of possible careers before landing on writer and teacher, which turned out to be sort of the thing I was going to always do. All the aptitude tests for occupation came back teacher every time. So it was in the cards for sure. But definitely writing and investing in that world was always going to happen. I didn't know it would be my entire career though, but that happened later on when I started taking classes at USC with Amy Bender, and who was sort of a great teacher, great writer, magical realist, but also just a really good teacher. So I started to see this as kind of a combined career that was possible, during those times. And then I started to sort of pursue that path more confidently.
Were you majoring? What were you majoring in?
I was a business major for a long time.
That's what I wanted. So you were taking these classes on the sly, kind of sneaking. Yeah,
sneaking them in. You had to take basic, GE classes and creative writing. Of course, I was like, I'll take that one, check it off. And then, of course, I started taking all of them. I'll do the upper division. I'll do this other one as an elective. And then eventually, I had enough to graduate with that degree. And so I said, let me just get out of here, take this road.
Well, I taught all my life. I taught at Hunter College. I taught all my life, and editing at Bellevue. I feel like writing is teaching, and I feel like editing is teaching, and the whole business has to do with, and also writing is learning yourself. I mean, you always find out what's happening during writing, and it's wonderful to hear you say how mingled it was for you right away, that you saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, and even now as an artist, as a language artist, I consider myself a student still. I'm a student of humanity. We're always watching, we're learning, I'm mining the world for material, sure, for stories, but also I'm trying to understand something about us, about myself, about my family, about all the internal, mechanisms that make up my identity and my perspectives and my choices and how they ripple out into the community and all of that and how it matters, in time, from present to past to future. All of these things are not concrete. They're not fixed. They are something to explore and discover and then relearn again and then share with other people. So that exchange, that process was I didn't have words for it, but I recognized it as something that I wanted to belong to.
And so tell me, I'm really curious about the organization that you created. When did you Live Right? Is that
Live Right?
Yeah. Great title. Apropos what all you just said. So when did you start it? Who's in it? How does it work? What's happening with it?
It was around 2014. So it was initially designed to be almost just sort of a club, because I had students that were coming back to me from other classes. They would go to different classes and would feel that they weren't being heard. So sort of, and they were all women of color that were coming to me and saying that we need to have a different kind of class where I don't have to spend so much time, explaining my identity or explaining the context of something, and we can get to the craft of it, and people will, immediately sort of understand that. And this was back in, not that long ago, just 10 years ago. And I said, well, yeah, we can do something. So eventually I just sort of started a little tiny group. It was a couple of us, and then it kept doubling and doubling. And then I realized, well, maybe there is a need for this. And that's when I sort of created the official group. And then I carried it on when I left Arizona. I was in Arizona at the time. And when I moved to Fresno, then I started applying for grants to kind of get funding. And then the group kind of evolved to sort of do workshops for communities of color, but also then anyone that didn't have access to sort of professional instruction, from the traditional academic kind of standpoint. And then I went on to youth classes. So last year, I think I did youth workshops for the Central Valley. So it's been a real ride. People still want to write. They want to be able to have this way of expressing themselves and get feedback. So it was sort of my goal to bring in all of my professor friends and folks that I know that can teach, but also are willing to kind of engage in the community and have them sort of hold workshops for people that need it. And it was totally free to those that want to participate. And it's been really fun, and also it's in demand.
And it sounds like a full-time job.
It can be. So we're on hiatus right now. So when the next cycle comes in, I'll apply again for next year, and we'll do another round. But it can be. So I just do what I can, to in between all the other stuff. So
I taught classes in our loft for a while in the 90s, and I had women. The women finally came to me and said, "Can we just stay with women?" The men would come to class who didn't know a thing and would absolutely dominate, and everyone would just sit there with their mouths open. These smart women who'd been. So we did that for a while. So I can really understand the seeds of doing that. Yeah. Whoever is feeling their voice is being cramped needs to get that cramp out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not for us, the writing, it's a compulsion, right? You have to do it. Yeah. And also to feel whole and healthy, you have to engage with the community and share it. So I want to be able to create those spaces where that is possible. And there's no barriers there for whatever reason.
That sounds wonderful. How big are the workshops? How many people are in your workshops?
Well, it varies. So the later ones, about 15, 17, people were in each of the youth workshops that we did last year. But some of them can be really big. I think I had a 50-person one, and it just depends on how big the space can be. So I'll kind of, advertise it for that. Or if it's limited to just students where they have to sort of be invited, and then they'll sign up for it and things like that. So it's a variety.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm dying to ask you, because you play around with form so much, and I'm really interested in that. I was Kurt Vonnegut's student, so he was like...
No. I love the book, though. I'm teaching it next semester, Pity the Reader.
You are?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear what you use and how it works.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So one of my other students too from last spring had it, and they had to choose different books that they were going to use to apply to their work and sort of it's a theory class. Yeah. And one chose yours and just loved it and was, really, really a big fan of thinking about language that way. So I said, well, everyone is going to read it now for the next round.
I am hoping in the future to do a lot more teaching with that book, because I haven't. I mean, it came out and then COVID hit, and I had a whole West Coast thing in my mind, because I grew up in California too, and it disappeared, the whole thing. So so you played around a lot with form. I read your novel, and then I kind of took it apart for myself to see how you did that, what you did actually. Okay. I know it's a really different experience than writing it. But before I talk about it, would you please explain what it's about as much as you possibly can, and I'll chime in if needed.
Yes, I can. I'll give you what the frame story is too, because you're hinting at sort of the bigger story too that becomes kind of this elaborate, black backdrop for all of it. But the main situation is that a woman discovers her brother dead from suicide, but instead of telling anyone, she pretends to be him through his phone for a week. So it's this, this state of total psychological break, but, and denial and this resistance to grief in a way that is part of grieving. And so that is the frame story. And then there's this, she's also an artist. So she's a creative mind, which allows for all of this kind of, restructuring of her reality in a way that, and we bring in what her artistic creations are, this novel, this other world that she's developed as a tool to help her tell the story of her life and her history and her reality. That voice is what's carrying the actual narrative. And the original title was Lesbian Assassins at the End of the World, because that
Go down again.
Lesbian Assassins at the End of the World, that was the original title. And it's because the voice is this otherworldly kind of, I call them kind of, librarians, these archivists from the future that are very feminine driven and kind of very, to a degree wholesome. And they love humanity. They love all the parts of it. And they perform us in a way as a way to remember. So they in themselves, this voice is this state of grief and celebration. That tells this story. It's a wild ride. I've had one librarian recently tell me that the story has all of her favorite genres in it. So it's a little hard to pin down in that way.
Yeah. So even that wasn't the thing that I was so interested in. What I was interested in was that you set out right away on page 1 what happened, and that Coral can't tell the story. She's not capable of telling the story. So whoever we are, is going to tell the story. I didn't have a real sense of who we was, to tell you the truth. The way that you explained it, I didn't have that sense. I just had that when Coral can't talk, all of those things for me kind of acted like the traditional omniscient narrator who butts in and says, this is happening and this is the big backdrop and here's an important thing to say. So for me, they all together acted as another kind of medium. But it is a wild ride, and I think I wrote to you, it felt a little like jazz. It's going here, going there, whatever the riff is that you want to use to get across what you're saying is what you did, including very realistic parts where it seemed like it was you, the writer, talking about writing. And it was really very, very interesting in all that shifting around.
Well, well, thank you, and I'm sorry to put you through it. It is a kind of a roller coaster, but everything you said about the voice is true. So it is this other medium, this almost kind of ghostly thing, this off this kind of voice that is beyond the reality of the world in a way that is calming, right? And can have authority to carry this person over these really tumultuous times.
And it gives a larger perspective, so that, because also the other thing, I felt I didn't love Coral. I know that she's in danger, and I've had this criticized against my own character, so I'm very critically interested in this point right now, because my character's like your character. She's grieving. She's pissed off, really pissed off at sort of the way the world works. So, how do you have that character be gentle and nice? Coral's not nice. She's protecting herself. She's not telling people. She doesn't tell. She's pretending by using her brother's phone to text people. She's pretending she's him. She's more than in denial. She's creating. As she's going along, she's keeping him alive.
Yeah, and she's also setting false expectations too. She's getting ready to.
She's setting up false expectations, dates. That's so this is very, if you wanted to look at her being kind and gentle to other people, she's not being. She's acting out her own grief and rage and sorrow. And the other thing, so for maybe a third, I kept waiting to hear more about him. Who was he and I could hear even editors saying, well, you've got to develop who she's grieving about. You've got to show who he is for why she's grieving, but you never do that. It's very minimal. We don't know much about him. We have no idea why he committed suicide. And that's not the point of your book. The point is really capturing that period of denial and rage and grief and self-protection, the kind of cocoon that a person is in, whether they're sort of helplessly in a cocoon when real trauma happens. I mean, you don't care. You can't. You're not able to care about other people as much as you need to care about yourself at that point.
That's right. And I love that you mentioned too about sort of the editor's instinct, and that did happen. So my editor, he's a young phenom. He's amazing. But one of his early points, was that, why don't we know why? And all I didn't have to answer much. I said, sometimes we don't know. And then that sort of stopped him completely. And he kind of just sat back and was, kind of had to process that. And that is the reality for this character, is that you're not going to get that answer, but you're going to have to be here with her. And you're going to have to sort of see the world like this for a little while. And it's not going to be all torture either. Some of it's kind of funny. And it's going to,
like things happen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And go ahead.
I was going to mention the part about, so, that we don't get to know, that's for sure. But she's also angry. She's angry. She's unstable. And I've gotten this question, and often they ask these kind of questions for all kinds of characters, who would you want to have dinner with out of your book? And I was like, none of these people, they're all problematic. I don't want to hang out with Coral for sure. Yeah. But if I could, I would ask my characters or other characters at the ends of the book, sort of, what did you learn? How are you going to go through the world now after you've experienced all of this? Mm-hmm. And I think that's more of the point of sort of how I write, how I approach sort of, hard topics or soft topics, whatever it is. It's sort of, what are we learning from this? How will we go on now that we've experienced it?
I have already experienced this kind of thing myself, but I think what I would be left with finally at the end, because that is how, I don't want to give your book away exactly, but it does conclude with her finally telling, and she tries. She begins to try to tell people. There's a wonderful Vonnegut story about all he talks about. All it is about, the underlying thing is about trying to tell somebody something important, and how hard it is sometimes to get it out. How hard it is to find somebody who wants to hear it. I mean, there's a whole thing going on about telling. So you leave us with not knowing how the reception is, and it's going to be brutal. But I think I would be left with compassion for people in the grip of that trauma. People are not kind. I mean, we had a good friend whose son died of a heart attack when he was like 33 on the ski slope. She'd raised these 3 boys by herself. This was the youngest. And she was kind of, I won't say mean, but she was very, people could easily offend her in the way that they tried to express their grief, because nothing can help you. I mean, nope. It's just a terrible, terrible pain. And what you also capture in the book is, it's not just that pain that she's experiencing. What that pain does is bring up all the other pains. And so I got her, even though you don't dwell on these, but I got pain from her sister-in-law, her former sister. Is that who it is? A former sister-in-law? No, it's what's her name?
There's the niece for sure. There's the brother's daughter. There's the mother. There are these other characters.
The person that Coral once had a crush on. It was his former girlfriend.
Oh, yes, yes.
And mother, isn't she?
They didn't get married, but yes.
Yes, yeah. Oh, they didn't get married. Okay, well, big deal. Okay, so they get married. And
Or
that,
maybe
and that,
common law.
yeah. That character herself is, I was very drawn to, because she was promising and she was lovely, and she couldn't handle life. She just, it's a tragic story. And so it's not just the brother's death, it's what it brings up, and it brings up incredible, horrible other losses, disappointments, abandonments for her. And so I think at the end of the book, talking about literature, reading literature is healing, your heart should open to people who are in that kind of the grip of that trauma. That's what I think.
That would be a great expectation to have for the book. I can't promise that, but that would be wonderful if that is the way it is received.
Can't promise anything, of course not. Yeah, you just have to put it out there. But I want to go back to the structure of it for a minute. So you do intrude with another thing. I had a notebook that I'd written down all of the titles in, and I left it on the train.
Oh, no.
And my whole notebook that I use every morning. Anyway.
Oh, I'd be sad.
Yeah. So anyway, so you have these elaborate titles. I'm calling them titles. It's the wrong word. The clinic for.
The clinic.
Yes. So can you say some of them right now? Let me see if I can find.
I don't remember. I know there's a clinic for lying to avoid pending death. I think that's one of the main ones. And these are all like I said, that the schools, these are the conduits for memory. So all of the clinics are ways to access Coral's memories, her childhood, her more recent ones as well, where she got valuable lessons from whatever it was. And that is where sort of the voice is reenacting sometimes, kind of manipulating the memory a little bit as needed in order to sort of, connect it to the moment, to use that lesson for the moment at hand. And so those repeat in different ways. There are a bunch of, I think there are about 9 different ones.
There's the clinic for accidentally killing the person you only mean to seduce.
That's called a lesbian relationship, I think.
Oh, you sure it's only restricted to a lesbian relationship?
In this character's mind, fairly. All right. That'd be a fair assessment.
So, and it's capitalized, and sometimes you do riffs on life in general. There's the more with capital M, and it's just filled with stuff like that. So now I want to ask you, in composing, I'm just curious, as writer to writer, what, if you are willing to share what ignited this, but then past that, the form.
Okay, so what ignited it was, a need to escape. And also I'm very, I don't write sci-fi, I don't write fantasy or anything like that usually, but I watch a lot of it. I'm into Star Trek, I'm a Trekkie. I know that whole world, and it's this kind of, utopia. It's an escape from the troubles of the day. So I wrote most of this during the early days of the pandemic. So it was, definitely a time to try to escape, to go to the place where things are we figured everything out, and it's kind of a comfort. But then you realize that Star Trek is actually colonial propaganda, and there's just a parallel for every problem that we have right now in modern societies, and that repeat themselves, consistently. So it doesn't offer as many solutions as it might, give this illusion to do so. So I started writing the fantasy story, and I have tens of thousands of words that never made it into the novel, because I eventually realized that the actual frame story, the grief, the suicide, the thing that is pushing this character off into this kind of softer place, is the real story. And it was hard to write that because it was a thing that needed to be written, and it was a thing that had to sort of, be accessed through recalling my own, grief from losing my mom. She was my best friend, so I lost her fairly young. I was 24, but that's young. That's young in my world.
It's young.
And it was sort of this huge, I call it the kind of crack of existence. You've got the before that moment and the after that moment. And there's this sort of, you can look over, you can kind of remember, but you'll never be that again. You'll never have that previous existence. You'll never be able to move through the world the way you did there, with the same eyes, the same shape of your body. Everything will be different because of how grief, works. And so I had to keep going and accessing that, repeatedly in order to write the harder frame story. And even though some of those parts are really funny to me now, when I wrote them, they were hard. Some days I'm crying, I'm sort of just, kind of exhausted from it. And then, a month later I reread it and I'm cracking up because it's just so insane. It's the things this character is doing, and for these reasons, for the thing. And even, today, recently, I texted my friends, about, mourning. We're, in the state of mourning and what it means and how long it lasts, and sort of how I feel kind of like I've always been born into a state of grief, where there's always been this kind of, lingering loss of something that I couldn't see but was promised to me, or something that's just always out of reach, that I can imagine so thoroughly that it feels like, a death when I can't quite get to it. And so there's a lot of that within the two states of the book, the imagined version of the world and the real, the present moment, where the character is really in the state of great turmoil.
Yeah.
And for the form of how I do that, yeah. So I was sort of, going back and forth from that, like I said, that fantasy to the reality. And then I said to really, I'm a flash fiction writer too.
Yeah.
Okay. But I am a flash fiction writer, and that form lends itself to a lot of unconventional approaches.
Yes.
So I used a lot of that habit, I guess, in the book, and sort of writing really small sections that can look really odd, but still carry a very important, emotional, moment for the characters. So I sort of, approached the shape of the book with that habit in mind, I guess, or that habit already built up, to not, have to approach things so traditionally in order to convey whatever thing I needed to do at the time for that character. So a lot of that went into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. At the BLR, I think that we are much less concerned with form and with something being, it's the stories are normally pretty realistic. We also have funny stories and stories that are not necessarily. And I think I have a feeling, I'm not sure this is true, but I feel like I gravitate towards those somewhat. But the thing that I'm always looking for, besides good writing, is to feel moved. And if I'm not moved, and also the interesting thing about being an editor and having to choose things with other people is, at first I was like, how could you not love this story? How could you not be moved by this particular? And they would say the same thing, like, it's so amazing how different people are. You walk out of a movie with friends, and I began to use that as the metaphor of how different. Thinking of just an ordinary thing like walking out of a movie, and people feel differently about it. So there's this long range of how different people can react to something. We usually agree at about 2 or 3 that are stellar stories in the pile, and then we're all over the place with other ones. But I was thinking about that in terms of my wanting to know, my curiosity about what Coral was going to do, and what the main frame, and why I wanted to skip, because I wanted to get to the main stuff.
That's really fair. That's really
fair. So just the whole thing about using surrealism and using. There's a quote I use in Pity the Reader from Vonnegut that I love. That's about you could you you can lie, that you have a premise that's a lie and you elaborate on that lie, and that it all works as long as the mechanics, he calls it the arithmetic. If the arithmetic adds up for the reader, so there's some logic,
Mhm.
then it works.
Yeah.
And
I always
so
say, I would say that that fiction, you need a little bit of truth to tell the lie. So I start in the opposite direction. I start with something that is not disputed in my mind, in my memory, and then
mhm,
from there I branch off and sort of tell the the falsehoods in order
yeah,
to understand that one thing that I began with.
yeah.
So it's a very much a mirror version of itself for those philosophies on how to approach a story.
Because I was also looking at the stories in How to Wrestle a Girl, and there's some of your stories are in a
Mhm.
chart, and how many times this and how many times that, and you see that whole thing of keeping it out there. But of course, that story doesn't move me, you know,
Oh,
because I don't have a I don't have a I don't have a character I don't have a situation to latch on to. I just have the chart. It doesn't move me. I respect it, but it doesn't move me.
I think you're right about the different kinds of people and our different perspectives and things that change our engagement with art. Because I've had students tell me, quite the opposite. So it's young writers who are just really excited and kind of, like you said, moved
Yeah,
by that sort of, story in that structure. And sometimes, I do get the comments about, these kind of unconventional layouts look more like just sort of exercises or practice moments where it's still not a story yet. And that's still just one perspective because it's still
absolutely.
a story,
Right.
It's still got the things in there, but the expectations from the audience are different. And if you don't deliver those expectations, some people will always have that block, it's not going to connect. And that's just reality. I'm fine with that. We
Yeah.
can't we can't, write for absolutely every single person.
And also, um, as an artist of any kind, you you have to allow people to have their own things and go on with your own thing. I mean, you can't, if everybody said to you, oh, I'm not moved by that story, and you said, oh, I guess I better not write that story anymore, you know that's the end of a writing career, right? I mean, that's, you have to keep doing what you do, how you do it, however it comes out. That's
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
in my early years too, I had an expectation sort of, I don't know if I put it on me or other people put it on me, but I thought that I had to write like a really, heavy, poetic kind of, American Negro spiritual, something like, Baldwin or Morrison. And I love them. They're some of my favorite writers. I cannot write that. I am not Toni Morrison. It is not in me exactly to do. And but to say that what I do somehow doesn't count if I don't live up to that expectation is also just a lie and a disservice to the range of artistic engagement that we can have and do as people. It will make you not want to write. And I remember encountering the actual authors that sort of gave me permission to write the way that I do, and that was ZZ Packer hasn't done another book, but wrote a really good one. Drinking Coffee Elsewhere,
Yeah.
young women being a little bit, absurd,
Yeah.
a little
Her
unserious, but
name is so
still,
great, right? ZZ.
yes. And so I realized, oh, I can be that way. I can be, less than perfect, less than, a lyrical, genius on the page.
Well, I mean, I'm a white person and I'm an old white person, but I want to say that when I started to see Black writers write things other than this the spiritual kind
Mhm.
of, I thought, this is good. We
Yeah,
we're arriving here. Everybody doesn't have to tell that story. You can be whatever. I think it's you know maybe you don't know. Maybe there's a spiritual in you later.
It's possible, or it's a story within a story too. So I like to do that, and it might be a thing.
Exactly.
But
It
yeah,
seems
and
like,
people do it very well and have the different angles on it, Percival Everett and all of that kind of thing. But these are, you have to do the story that's within you to tell. And I do notice that I do write a lot about grief, of course. I also think all stories are grief stories. They're love stories, grief stories, and loneliness stories. That's
yeah,
sort of what kind of encompasses sort of the core of our identities and humanity. But I also write a lot about a particular part of life, sort of adolescence, and this sort of really transformative period
well,
of
really
growth.
well.
And
Yeah.
it's a thing that I'm kind of haunted by. It's the thing that troubles my brain so much, and so I keep going back to it.
No, I was going to comment on that because the other story I really was drawn to, I think is amazing, and How to Wrestle a Girl is biology class.
I like
I
that.
mean, yeah, like in string theory and this, they're both in classes. I remember being told at the workshop, Iowa Writers Workshop, oh, you can't write about teaching, you can't write about being a student. It's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And that's insane. In both of these stories, that biology class is so heartbreaking a story. Because I think it tells a story of many students and many teachers. It tells a story of a very eager, promising student latching on to a teacher, and the other kids, nobody wants anybody to get too far, too big for their britches, as my grandmother used to say. And I mean, I majored in sociology, and I remember reading about an experiment about workers. And if someone worked too hard, too fast, the other workers started to shun that person.
Yeah.
And so your story is much more gripping than that little anecdote I just gave. It's heartbreaking, and I thought it took a lot of courage to be there with all that meanness and heartbreak.
I appreciate that. But, in my community, we call it the crab mentality, like a bucket of crabs. One crab tries to escape and the others will pull it back down, and they just kind of keep crawling on each other in that way. So we will die here together.
Yeah.
Even even if it's possible for us to let each of us out one at a time, no. There's something about that in human nature, and it manifests, and children, kids, young people are human beings. They will do it.
Yeah.
And it's a really sad story, but it's also one of those weird, funny ones. And I also got to play with the voice, the first person plural that I use for my novel. So it was one of those, kind of branch or bridge technique stories for me.
Yeah.
So I really, it is a special kind of moment for me to do that one. But that one, along with string theory, I didn't think about it. They're very much companion pieces in a lot of ways.
Yes, they are. They really are. Yeah. Let's see. Well, do you have any profound advice to give to writers or to readers or to anyone else?
To my writers, especially my young writers, your old writers, all the ages, I give the same advice. You have to write for yourself first. Write the thing that is sacred, the thing that troubles you the most, and write it as if no one else will ever see it the first time. And then get that out. And then write to be understood. So all of your other drafts are then to be for other people, outside people, to understand what you've experienced, what you're trying to say on the page.
Yeah.
And then you can try to write for money if you want to. At that point, you can keep shaping it as you see fit, if that's neat. But definitely, yes, if you don't do that, if you don't go to the sacred places, you're not doing the thing that is necessary to be totally alive with this art that we do.
I think that's superb advice. I just want to put exclamation marks. And Pity the Reader is about that other part of the process. That title means after you get it out, you got to consider them. Yeah, go ahead.
Now you have an audience. Now that relationship is on display. All right.
I would like to know if you, especially since you just said that about first you have to write for yourself, if you feel a difference in your relationship to your work, having now had some acclaim, than you did when you started out, and how you keep that writing for yourself aspect?
That is a great question because, I visit a lot of universities and things and talk to new writers. And I remember being them so well, where no one expected you to do anything. No one expected you to produce a book. If you did, it was, just a miracle on its own. But you could write anything. There were no expectations. But now I do feel like there are expectations. I've been, and I start to forget that I've been doing this for a while. I've got 3 whole books now.
Yeah.
And even more strange things are happening. I have every once in a while a person would say I'm their favorite writer, which just blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I always think, well, you just need to read more. And then I remember, well, let them have this for now.
And let yourself have it too.
Let me have this too. And then I started to think, well, I do write a certain kind of way, certain kinds of stories, and then they can be a little bit wild, yes. So there's a little bit of expectations for surprise and mystery, and sort of literary. I'm also starting to think of myself as a literary horror writer, where there's just a lot of tragedy in this kind of realistic sort of situation. But also, room for comedy, room for all of these other things. So these expectations now exist for my work that I didn't have before. I could do anything. I could make the worlds whatever they wanted to be, or I needed them to be for my own health in the moments. But I do see that. I see those expectations now, and I also have more words. I do like that I have more words for what I do. That's helping because I do know that I write about. I know I can understand my themes. I understand sort of the people a little bit more than I did in the early stages, where I would sort of, have to really kind of concentrate and sort of stumble upon the accidental kind of moments of beauty and grace that happen in stories. I do feel a little bit more authority over that in a way that I didn't before, because I've been spending so much time with articulating what I do and how characters work and how stories work. And that's been really, liberating for creating new stuff quickly in a way, but then also paralyzing, because how new can it be? Will this be what, the world needs or wants from me right now? Does it have to wait? How long will it wait? All these other kind of things.
Yeah.
So that comes later.
You have to get those out of your head and get back to yourself each time. So
every time, over and over again. It is a repeat process.
Yeah. Venita, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I could talk to you for a lot longer.
This is fun, Suzanne. I appreciate it.
And thanks for telling me about Pity the Reader. That was great. And I hope our viewers run out and get some of your books and enjoy them as much as I do.
Okay, I appreciate it. Any support is always welcome, but thank you for sure.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.